सॉल्विंग SFGs डे एंड नाइट। लेवल 1 नहीं किया था उन्होंने पहले सॉल्व, तो रात रात को बैठ के करते थे।
मेरे को वो एक रैंक की तलब लग गई थी सर। एक बार आने लगी तो फिर लगा कि नहीं यार, नीचे नहीं जानी चाहिए।
जो यहाँ पे टेस्ट होगा आई विल गिव, चाहे मैंने कैसे भी दिया हो, पर मैंने वो टेस्ट रेगुलर दिए जब तक मैं यहाँ पे था।
Hello everyone, welcome to the ForumIAS Town Hall, that is daily newspaper analysis. Today, 20 November 2025, we are going to take up these 5 articles from the Hindu newspaper. So the first news article is about recognizing the critical role of child care worker. This news article is discussing the situation of child care workers. That is, we can say, the invisible economy of care, and we know that how important these workers are because they plays a major role in building a stronger and a more inclusive India. But what the challenges they are facing and what steps we can take up to rectify that. Second news article about redefining the narrative of TB eradication worldwide. So this news article talks about that India is leading the world in the fighting this age-old disease of TB through its homegrown innovation. Recently, the Goa-based diagnostic, there is a company 𝐼𝐸 Diagnostic. It has received the 𝐼𝐸 Awards for developing a true net, that is a PCR machine for diagnosis of the TB. So the author also discusses how important is a timely diagnosis of those diseases to reduce its incidences. The next news article is about hidden cost of the polluted groundwater. So in this news article, the author has discussed the crisis of the groundwater contamination. It has taken an example of Punjab, which is applicable everywhere, all over the India. It has discussed that what are the causes of that groundwater contamination and what are the impact of this groundwater pollution and what can we take up the policy measures to address this issue. The next news article is about breaking the rules. So recently the Supreme Court has reversed its earlier direction on the environmental clearances of the projects. So basically earlier the rule was that you have to take the prior environmental clearances before starting a project. But the Supreme Court has given a judgment this time that the post-environmental clearances can also be done. So it has raised an issue, and some section of our society has criticized this also, this judgment. So it raises an issue about the intersection of environmental protection and developmental imperatives, which is making it highly relevant for the governance and environmental laws in India. The last news article is about reset with Riyadh. So this news article is discussing about the major shift going on in the West Asia geopolitics. As we know that the US is following the dehyphenation policy with Saudi Arabia by and Israel relation. As for example, recently the US President Donald Trump has designated Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally. As well as it has also advanced to sell the advanced F-35 fighter jets and military technologies to the Saudi Arabia. So how the West Asia's geopolitics is changing and what could be the implication on India's West Asia policy that we are going to discuss. So let's start with our first news article, that is regarding recognizing the critical role of childcare workers. So we often talk about the developmental indicators like GDP growth, but we rarely discuss the invisible economy of care, the unpaid workers that sustain our society. So basically this article is highlighting why recognizing the childcare workers is not just about the fairness, but about building a stronger and a more inclusive India. On October 29, the International Day of Care and Support was declared by UN in 2023. And we can get this importance because we know that it's not just limited to the India. At the global level also, the women and the girls perform a disproportionate share of unpaid care work like cooking, cleaning, looking after the children's and elderlies. In India, the time use survey 2024 shows that women spend around 7 hours on unpaid domestic care work versus the men only spending 2 hours. So if we calculate this, it constitutes around 15 to 17% of our GDP. So you can imagine 1/6 of our economy is invisible, unrecognized, and unpaid. So this has a serious implication for the women workforce participation and children development. If we see the scenario about the childcare, so India's response to the childcare has been historically its roots in early 20th century efforts by pioneers like 𝐼𝐸𝐻𝐻𝐸 𝐸𝐻𝐻𝐸 with developmentally appropriate practices. Post-independence, we saw the childcare become mostly privatized, which exclude the low-income families. And if we see that systematically the childcare began in 1975 after the launch of Integrated Child Development Services Scheme in 1975. So today we can say it's one of the world's largest early childhood programs with 1.4 million Anganwadi centers, reaching 23 million children and employing around 2.4 million Anganwadi workers and helpers. By 2030, we will need to reach 60 million children and almost doubling our workforce to the 5 million workers. But here the problem is, despite being the backbone of child nutrition and the development, these workers are severely underpaid and they are earning around 8,000 to 15,000 per month, barely meeting the minimum wages. They also lack social security, career growth opportunities, and the other provisions like paid leaves and all those things. So if we see the recent updates shows that there was some salary hike about happening in 2025, but we are still far away from treating them as a skilled professional they are. There is one more angle which we might miss, that is of climate change. So the climate change is making childcare even more critical. How? Let's discuss. If let's assume when there is a drought or a flood hit a rural area, it's a man that migrate to the cities for the work, leaving the women as a primary caregivers with a less support. If there is another scenario, let's say both migrate to the urban area, so both parent has to work to afford a high urban living cost. So what happens? The male person will be doing the job. Women usually take up the work as a domestic help, so that they can earn extra. But the issue arises that when the woman is also working, both parents are working, who is going to take care of their children? So which connects our persistently high child stunting at 35% and poor nutrition indicators. Only 11% of children aged 6 to 23 months get minimum acceptable diets. And the mother's lack of time for the care directly impacts the child development. So what are the initiatives the government has taken up in this regard? So government has launched the Palna scheme for the creche, especially for the children under 3 years. And latest update is, as of 2025, around 1,761 Anganwadi cum creche operational and 1,284 standalone creche as of 2025, with a plan of 17,000 creche by 2026. Government is aiming to improve the creche facilities under the Maternity Benefit Act also. Another thing which we have to focus is that we need to triple the budget also. Currently, the budget in the childcare is about 0.4% of GDP. And if we see the Scandinavian countries, it is around 1.5%. So we have to almost triple the budget also. Apart from this, we have to ensure the better training and skill developments of those childcare workers also, and improve their working condition and wages. So let's move to our next news article, that is redefining the narrative of TB eradication worldwide. So this article is basically telling how India is leading the world's fight in the age-old disease with a homegrown innovations. So if we see that traditionally to diagnose the TBs, we relied on sputum smear test. So what happened in the sputum smear test is that we examine the sputum under the microscope for the TB bacteria. It's a cheap and fast, but it misses many cases, especially in children and those with the low bacterial load. Another one was the lab culture. What we used to do that here here the bacteria are grown in the lab. It is more accurate, but it was slow because the result used to take 1 to 8 weeks, and it's going to be expensive and infrastructure heavy. But what becomes a game changer? The game changer become the PCR machine, that is the point of care diagnosis. So the entire PCR machine like TrueNet, they are portable, battery powered, and can diagnose the TB and the drug resistance within an hour right at the primary health center. WHO and ICM are also endorsed this tool like TrueNet, and over 10,000 TrueNet devices are now deployed in more than 80 countries, which is transforming the TB care in the remote and resource limited settings. India's global leadership in this direction. So India has a national TB elimination program, and it has rapidly scaled up the molecular testing, setting up the thousands of diagnostic units across the country. So the result is that TB incidence has dropped by 21% since 2015, and mortality has declined significantly. India is considered now as a model for the world, with its diagnostic used in the mobile clinics in Africa and in the refugee camps of Eastern Europe. But the bigger picture we see, the whole idea is that the faster diagnosis means quicker treatment, reduced transmission, and better outcome. But the technology alone is not enough. If we have to fight against the TB, we need to include the nutrition supports, stigma reduction, and community involvement. And if we talked about in this direction, we have to develop the collaborative model. The TB eradication in India is now a shared mission between the public sector, that is government, ICMR, private innovators, Molbio Diagnostic Company, for example, and community health workers. So this partnership leverages agility, scale, technology, reach, and accountability. So everyone has to come together to address the issue of TB. Let's move to the next news article, that is hidden cost of polluted groundwater. So this news article is discussing a crisis that is literally beneath our feet but invisible to most of us, that is groundwater contamination. In Punjab, the lab test reveals the uranium levels far above the safe limits, and the children of the farmers, we can say, have developed the skeletal deformities from the fluoride poisoning. So this isn't just considered as a health tragedy, it's economic time bomb being considered. If we see the numbers, so the annual ground report quality report 2024 says that nearly 1/5, around 20% of the groundwater samples over 440 districts in India exceed the safe contamination limit of uranium, fluoride, nitrate, and arsenic. Punjab is considered the most affected, and almost 1/3 of the samples showing uranium level above the permissible limits, and the widespread presence of the fluoride, nitrate, and arsenic across the district. What is the impact? The health impact, we know that the uranium contamination, the safer limit is 0.03 milligram per liter as per the WHO, can cause a chronic kidney diseases, skeleton deformities, cancers, reproductive health issues, and the fluoride can lead to the fluorolysis, disabling the workers and children, while arsenic exposure results in cognitive impairments and cancer. If we talk about the economic cost, the World Bank estimated that environmental degradation from the polluted water can cost around 80 billion annually, which is approximately the 6% of GDP. So if we think about it, we are losing more to the invisible pollution than we spend on many flagship schemes. So this crisis hits at economic cost also. As well as the waterborne diseases results in the billions spent on healthcare and millions of lost working days. Another impact is of agriculture. So we know that soil is going to be degraded because of the contaminated water, and contaminated irrigation also going to reduce the crop yield also and accumulate the heavy metals in our food. So when there is enough heavy metals in our food, it is going to compromise our quality also. And when the food quality is going to be compromised, it is going to hit our agriculture export sector, because we know that the Western countries, they have a high safety standards, so they might be going to reject our agriculture exports. So it will be threatening our $50 billion agriculture export sector. Another angle which we have to keep in mind is about the social inequality in this. What does it is trying to say, the social inequality? We have a rich families, they can afford, they can buy the bottled water also, filtered water. But what about the poor families? The poor families have no choice but to drink the poison. And because of that, there is going to be high out-of-pocket health expenses, which push them into the debt trap. And children's growing up with a fluoride arsenic exposure face limited exposure prospects. This perpetuates in intergenerational poverty. So these are going to be create the limit their future opportunities also. If we see what are the root cause behind this, so the root cause are the reckless over extraction. So especially in Punjab, even the Haryana also, industrial effluents, as there is a weak enforcement which allows industries to dump their toxin, untreated sewage flows directly into the aquifers, chemically intensive agriculture, so over excessive use of chemicals in our agriculture, and it is been encouraged because of the subsidies also. Another factor is about the deeper drilling worsen the water quality. It's also create a vicious cycle also. How? For example, as we know that the water table is going to be reduced. So the farmer, as the water table is going to be reduced, the farmer is bound to drill deeper. So he will be going to drill the deeper, but he will find more worse quality of water. And when he is going to see the poor quality of water, he is going to apply more fertilizer. And when he is going to apply more fertilizer to compensate this, it is again going to worsen the water quality and contaminate the water. So it is creating the vicious cycle also. Now coming to the solution, what are the solutions we have? So the solution is, if we talked about immediate solution, we have to come up with a real-time monitoring system with open data access. We have to ensure the strict enforcement against the industrial and sewage pollution. We, at the community level, the water purification units can be deployed. For example, in Nalgonda and Telangana, and pilot crop diversification programs, Punjab and Haryana, shows the promising result. If we talk about the long-term reforms, which we have to keep it. So first we have to shift from the input subsidies to the incentivize for the crop diversification, organic farming and micro irrigation system. Let's move to the next news article, that is about the breaking the rules. So basically the Supreme Court has given their verdict on the post facto environmental clearances. The Supreme Court in recent major decision reversed its earlier order that had stayed the grant of the post fact environmental clearances. The court clarifies that while prior environmental clearances remains the rules, but the post facto environmental clearances may be allowed in rare and exceptional cases, such as when there is significant resources have already been invested, or we can penalize them, or mitigation measures can be taken up. So basically, this is going to discuss the issue which is at the intersection of environmental protection and developmental imperative. Let's see the background. So the background says that Environmental Protection Act 1986 and EIA notification orders 1994 and 2006 require prior environmental clearances before starting any large project. Earlier judgments like Common Cause to 2017, 𝐼𝐸𝐵 Pharmaceutical to 2020 held that post facto environmental clearances are impermissible where prior environmental clearances is mandatory. So here the Supreme Court is saying that we need to have the prior environmental clearances before starting any large project. In May 2025, Vanashakti order also, the Supreme Court struck down the 2017 notification and office memorandum in which it was facilitated that the post facto environmental clearances can be allowed. Existing post facto election environmental clearances to be stand. But recently the Supreme Court's new verdict where it recalled its Vanashakti judgment and permitted the post facto environmental clearances in rare exceptional cases, such as when substantial resources have already been invested and project is legally permissible. But such clearances are subject to the heavy penalties and mitigation measures, but the demolition is not mandated unless the project is environmentally unsustainable. So this is what the recent judgment the Supreme Court has said. The issue is the other section is saying that the dissenting opinion called that it is a retrogression and violation of precautionary principle, which is a cornerstone of environmental jurisprudence. So it is saying that once the project has been done, it has created an impact. So what is the use of this environmental clearances? But the court has its own side. The court has noted that if we are demolishing the completed public project could cause more harm to the environment, like debris, reconstruction, emission, and the waste of the public resources. So in this case, it is allowed that you can impose the heavy penalties and can take up the mitigation measures. Let's move to the next news article that is around the reset with the Riyadh. So as we know that there is a major shift going on in the West Asia geopolitics. US has officially dehyphenated Saudi Arabia from the Israel in its foreign policy. So what does it mean? Simply we put, the US is now deepening its ties with Saudi Arabia independently without making it conditional on Saudi-Israel normalization. So this is a big change from the previous US strategies where Saudi-Israel relations were tightly linked. So if we see the recent development, so US President Donald Trump has officially designated Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally and agreed to sell the advanced F-35 fighter jets and military technology to the kingdom, despite Israel's objection. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman recently visited the White House, marking the end of brief chill in US-Saudi ties that followed the 𝐮𝐻𝐵 𝐸𝐿𝐼 murder in 2018. So if you know about this incident, so it was alleged that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has ordered for the execution of the killing of 𝐮𝐻𝐵 𝐸𝐿𝐼, which was criticized by the US. If we say historically, the US-Saudi relation have been anchored in strategic and energy interest, often prioritizing the geopolitics over human rights concern. The Biden administration previously linked the Saudi-Israel normalization to the US-Saudi defense deal, but in October 2023, Hamas attacked and Gaza war derailed this plan. So the US administration was trying to normalize the relation between Saudi and Israel. Saudi Arabia insists that normalization with Israel is possible only if there is a credible time-bound path to the two-state solution for Palestine, a demand which was rejected by Israel. Trump recognized the regional complexities and Israel's intransigencies and has now dehyphenated the Saudi Arabia from the Abraham Accord, choosing to deepen the US-Saudi ties without immediate normalization with Israel. So this is something which we India can also learn, where India is also following this de-hyphenation foreign policy in case of Palestine and Israel. So Saudi Arabia is also seeking access to the advanced US computer chips and wants to build a large data center aiming to become the tech power. So what is the key takeaway we can say about is that the US is now treating Saudi Arabia as a standalone strategic partner, not just as a piece in Israel puzzle. And this shift reflects the changing dynamics of the West Asia, where traditional allies are being redefined. And what learning we can take up, that the foreign policy is not just about values, but about strategic interest. And every partner is to serve or fulfill that interest only. Even the Saudis showing nearness to the US because they need something. US is also showing better relation with the Saudi because they have certain vested interests. So we have to keep an eye on these developments because that impact India's own West Asia policy also. So thank you all. That's all from our side for today's newspaper analysis.